Hello, my name is Rusty Coones, and I have Gary Poh and Candace Seabron with me. How you guys doing?
Good,
How are
thanks.
you?
How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for being here. I like the museum. That's a really cool spot you got going on there. You know.
Thanks. It's a
So let me
labor of
let me
love.
explain for the people watching here. Basically, here's a man that has a collection of over 100 motorcycles. He had bikes at his friend's house, at his house, all over the place, and he decided he needed a warehouse. So he starts looking around all over the state and out of state, and he goes and finds this really cool 5,000 foot, 2-story post office in a ghost town in Eureka, Utah. And there's a great story about that town, a lot of motorcycle related racing and other things going on. And so he moved his collection out there and he started the journey. And now he's been open for a while. He's having a blast with it out there. People are using it. It's like a destination for motorcyclists. They go ride all over the place, stop there, free espressos and all kinds of stuff. I'll go there for that myself, you know. But anyhow, before we get into the actual, museum and all the details of the town, I want to go back to your passion for motorcycling. I know you had to have a big passion to do all this because you're not in it for the money. This isn't like a commercial deal, where you're there pumping in the money, and all that. You're doing this out of love for motorcycles.
Yeah. We're pumping in the money, but we don't get.
But it's going in. It's going in, but it ain't coming back. Yeah. And also you kind of fell in love with the town of Eureka while you were at it, and now you've got a great relationship with all the locals there, and you're really helping with everybody in every way you can there too, which is really cool.
We hope we are. That's our intent. Yes.
So anyhow, let's go back to your first experience with motorcycles. When was that?
So my first experience with motorcycles, I was probably 13 or 14 years old. Grew up in Southern California. Was playing, Little League baseball, and my baseball coach, he would ride his motorcycle in, and to do our practices and such. And keep in mind, this is probably, I don't know, 1979. I'm going to say somewhere in that range, maybe 78. And he asked if I wanted to try and ride his bike, or at least maybe I asked him probably, and he allowed me to do it. And he started it and showed me how to put it into gear. And he said, "Okay, let the clutch out slowly." And I did not do that. I let it out quickly. And I also, whiskey throttled, full throttled it straight into a fence. I don't think I went more than 8 to 10 feet, and hit a wood fence and busted the fence, and it was a whole production. And he felt horrible. I felt horrible, but he thought it was his fault, and I thought it was my fault. But I did get hurt, and it kind of got me on the path of maybe I want to learn how to ride a motorcycle. Right
on. So after that, what was your next experience with motorcycles? Did you get right into it after that, or did you take?
No, I dabbled with it. I still felt embarrassed, I guess, as a kid. And then maybe a year or two after that, a friend of mine who would go from, I grew up in a little town called Victorville, and we would go to Huntington Beach and Hermosa Beach and Redondo Beach and all these places, he had gotten a 1979 CB750 and allowed me to take it to go down to Huntington Beach. Keep in mind, my previous experience on a motorcycle was that one experience, and I picked up the bike and I pretended I knew what I was doing, and it turned out I did okay, and I rode that bike all the way to Huntington Beach and back. That was my first real trip on a motorcycle, and
so
that was
wait a minute. Let me interrupt you for a second. So the guy that you ran his bike into a fence loaned you a motorcycle after that?
No, different guy.
Okay.
Yeah, just a friend of mine, a different guy. But yeah, no, he didn't. He thought I knew how to ride a motorcycle. I did not know how to ride a motorcycle, but I told him I did, and I took it slow, and it worked out. But that was my second experience, and then after that, I growing up in Victorville, it's a high desert, a lot of dirt biking, and all my friends had dirt bikes, and I thought maybe I should mess around with dirt bikes for a while before getting back into street bikes. And so I bought a used motorcycle, and I want to say I paid $300 for it back in the day, and it was a 1970 Husqvarna 400 Cross.
Oh yeah.
And why that bike? Because that's the bike that Steve McQueen rode on any Sundays. So, and that was my first, real legitimate, all my own motorcycle. And then I think shortly after that, then three-wheelers came out, and then four-wheelers came out, and I kind of got into those for a while as well. And then it full circle came back into street bikes and back and eventually Harley Davidsons.
Right on. So how many bikes did you start out? I mean, what did you do? Collect one bike at a time, or did you buy? Yeah.
No, one bike at a time. Yeah, one bike at a time. And
yeah.
And I think my first, like legitimate Harley Davidson would have been it was a first year Evo Sportster. So I think that was that's a 1984, I think, when they actually came out with the Evo or Sportster. And thought I was just the coolest guy ever. I was probably, 30 years old, maybe a little less than that, maybe late 20s. And thought I was really cool, but I'm 6'3", and I was 6'3" back then too, maybe a few pounds lighter, but I was still a tall kid on a little teeny.
Yeah, it's a little bit small for you there. Yeah.
Yeah, really small. And so I rode that for a while, and then my second bike would have been a Pro Street type of chopper was my second bike, and that was probably in I'm gonna say the 90s, early 90s probably. In fact, I want to say it was probably, a lot of time. It was about that time when a lot of guys were getting custom motorcycles when Jesse James, had the documentary on Discovery Channel.
Yeah.
And so you didn't want a stock Harley, you had to get a custom motorcycle, and so I went straight to a custom motorcycle before I had a stock Harley.
So you bought and sold and collected and had different bikes over the years. What's the first bike out of the 100 that you still have right now?
So the one bike I still have is actually here in the museum. I don't know if you can see it. It's back there. It's a 1965 Harley Davidson Sprint. And I'm sorry, 1963 Harley Davidson Sprint. And it's a 250cc, Italian-made Harley Davidson. And I bought that bike. And I live in Utah now, and what started is that my son, my son's now 29. I think he was maybe 7 or 8 years old at this time, and he would play with one of the neighbor kids, and I would take him over to the neighbor kids, and I would see glimpses in their garage of this motorcycle. I could only see a little piece of the motorcycle, and I thought it was neat. And I was, interested in older motorcycles at that time. I like it, not just motorcycles, but I like old things, antiques, and in general. And saw that motorcycle and convinced my son to ask his friend's dad if he wanted to sell that bike. And his dad said, "Yeah, come over and get it." And I paid $50 for it. And the guy had it for like 15 years, and he bought it for like $50, and he never could get it running. And I brought it to my house, and I rode it to his house later that day, and then just ended up keeping the bike. In fact, my son, when he got into high school, that's the bike that he rode to high school. He was the only kid, to ride a Harley Davidson in high school, And by the way, nobody at his school thought that was cool, except for the automotive, shop teacher. He thought it was cool. Nobody else thought it was cool. They thought it was a piece of shit, So, and I shouldn't have said shit, but a piece of crap. How about that?
So look, tell me. So when you had your collection up over 100, and you felt really squeezed, and your buddy, you were keeping the bikes over at his house, he was getting upset with you. Tell me about your search for a building.
So it started out that we were, and by the way, the collection at that time wasn't as big as it is now. It was probably $30. So it was still, well, to give you an example, I think I had at one point maybe 7 motorcycles in my living room, and which sounds really hoarderish, but we had them on display, and we had brochures with them in frames on the wall. So we had already kind of done a little museum in our house. And Candace, bless her heart, she to this day wants me to put motorcycles back in the house. She enjoyed it.
They look good in the living room.
They do look good in the living room, but we have a great place here.
It's a little empty.
Yeah, it's empty now. Yeah, but
You're gonna put some back.
Yeah. So at that time, I was thinking about, my retirement plan, for later in life. And I thought, hey, houses are expensive. We should buy a home somewhere on a farm in a warmer climate than Salt Lake. And I'll convert the barn into a shop, and we'll, work on vintage and antique motorcycles, because there's not that many people that do that. Right. And I thought, hey, I can do a couple bikes a year and I'll be fine. So we were kind of going down that path, and I had started looking at homes in southern Utah and Nevada and Arizona and California and all warmer places. And we happened to be, Candace and I happened to be on a ride that came through Eureka. And I was familiar with Eureka, Utah. For years, I myself been riding motorcycles through here, and saw a for sale sign. It was the first time I'd ever seen a for sale sign on any of the buildings in town. And out of curiosity, I called the real estate agent just because I was curious what a 5,000 square foot post office sells for in a ghost town, and it was shockingly inexpensive. And of course, the building, it said empty for 46 years, I want to say, something like that. Or 36 years it said empty. And so, the building needs some work, but still the price was right. And the space was there, and we negotiated and ended up, securing the building and bought it in December of 2016. So
right on, man. So this town actually has a little bit of history with motorcycles. Not only was it a silver mining town, but in 1914, during the Silver Jubilee,
correct,
racing motorcycles. Tell me a little bit about that.
Right. So the town was incorporated in 1850, which in itself is pretty interesting, because Utah, nobody was here until 1848. So just 2 years after the Mormons even got here, they incorporated this town because they had hit a major silver deposit here in this town in 1850. And the town started becoming populated very, very quickly. Not with Mormons, in fact, mostly not Mormons that were here. It was many different immigrants that were here in 1850. But they started a local town celebration. I don't know, what celebration they have in your town, but out here it's called the Silver Jubilee. It's kind of like their Founders Day, and where they have, music and food and like a little fair type of a deal. And they started doing that in 1850, or excuse me, in 1850. And by 1914, it was actually pretty large. And in 1914, they were racing motorcycles from nearly directly in front of what is now the museum to another town that's about 10 miles away and back. The town's called Mammoth. And they were racing motorcycles from here to there and back in 1914 during the Silver Jubilee parade.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, pretty cool. And in fact, in the newspaper article, I can send you some of those, but the guy who won made it there and back in like 18 minutes, I want to say. And that was just staggering, speeds, back in that.
Yeah,
day.
for then.
Yeah.
What about that, the race from Salt Lake City, and it was a race between motorcycles, cars, trains, and a mule.
Yeah. So in 1927, also for the Jubilee celebration, they, decided to see what's faster, an airplane, a car, a train, or motorcycle, or a horse. And they had a race from Salt Lake City, downtown Salt Lake City, to Eureka, to literally to the city hall, which is only a couple buildings from us, in 1927 during that Jubilee race. And the favorite to win was the guy in the motorcycle. So the train, you know, they all left at the same time. And the pilot of the airplane had to get to the airplane. The train just had to leave, but it had to continue making its, you know, stops along the way. And then the horse left normally, and as well as the motorcycle. And I haven't found out who actually won that race. I couldn't find the article to say he won, but I'm suspecting it would have been the motorcycle, because it would have been very difficult to even get an airplane up here. You know, even where it would have landed is about 5 miles from here. So
yeah, did you say it was like 6,500 foot elevation?
Yeah, so the museum is at 6,500 feet, but the mountain to get, you know, here, you know, is more like 10,000 foot elevation. So the plane can't go over the mountain, not in 1927.
Yeah.
They had to go around.
Yeah, okay, now I get that. Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, it would have taken quite a long time for an airplane to get here. So in fact, the train probably beat the airplane at that time.
Yeah. You know. Another fact that you told me that's kind of interesting, you were saying that everybody that owned a motorcycle in that town, it was documented in the newspaper.
Right. So you know, being into old things, I do a lot of research, and you know, now we have these things at our fingertips, and this town, when this building was built in 1922, had a population of about 3,500, and it peaked at about 4,000. That's just Eureka, but there were about 10 other cities that made up the Tintic mining district, which is why the museum's called the Tintic Motorcycle Museum, because of the name of the district. But in total, there was about 9,000 people that lived in this district in 1922, and so you had you know, a lot of people. They had a local newspaper, and now that newspaper is digitized, so I can go in and do word searches on you know, in like, it's almost like a Google type of thing. And so I searched words like motorcycle and Harley Davidson and Indian, Henderson and Pope, and all the names that existed back then on motorcycles. And so up until 1935, it's very well documented, every single person that bought a motorcycle from 1900 basically to 1935. And it's a short list. There's only, you know, maybe 25 to 30 guys that actually owned a motorcycle during that time. So, and
you're saying that around the area there, when people got motorcycles, cars, and different things, they're so far from town, they never leave those motorcycles.
That's correct. Yeah. And so I, you know, early on, I figured that out, that very likely, you know, those bikes, certainly not the whole bike. I mean, no joke, this town's so small now, I know every single building in this town, and have probably been in every single building in this town. And, you know, there's no, you know, complete bikes that are here, but very likely I thought that there were pieces of these bikes. And if you know anything about these really early pre-1920 bikes, just pieces of them are very, very valuable. And so I had this theory that these bikes are still there. And I do have photographs of some of these early bikes. And one bike in particular was a 1924 Harley Davidson that was sold in 1924 to a gentleman in the town of Dividend, which is a town right next to Eureka that had a population of about 1,500 at its peak, but now that population is zero. In fact, there's not a single foundation or structure even left in that building, but it's you know, very well mapped, and there's lots of photographs of it when it was around. So I have a picture of this 1924 Harley Davidson sitting in a baseball field, and using things like Ancestry.com and census records, I was able to, because I knew the guy's name, and I was able to figure out the house that he lived in. And using maps, I was able to figure out where that house was located. And we literally found pieces of that very bike. We found part of the transmission. We found a kickstand. We found a section of the rear fender with the tail light on it, and a few other odds and ends. And I never found, you know, like a motor, which is what I was hoping for. But we did find pieces of the bike, and And from the casting number on the kickstand, we were able to identify that it in fact was a 24 Harley Davidson JD. So in this particular story, there was only one in that area. So we know that that is actually the very bike.
That
it's
bike.
not a bike like it, it's the bike that's in the picture.
Yeah.
So
And
kinda
also,
cool.
one of the other things that's interesting is you mentioned being that was a post office and that was a silver mining town. They had a really elaborate vault system for their mail and silver. And
Yes.
back then, the postal inspectors, there were no cameras. So they had
Correct.
hidden tunnels and systems throughout the building where these actual postal inspectors were like spies looking
Yep.
through little peepholes at everybody to make sure they're not stealing the mail or whatever. Can you give a little elaboration on that?
Yeah, and I mean, you're dead right. So it's, you got to put yourself back to 1922, 1923, right? I mean, a postal worker made a decent salary, but it was probably better than what a miner made, but they weren't attorneys, they weren't making massive amounts of money. And just like it is today, man, if you have a need, the car breaks down or whatever, and you work at a gas station and it's easy to grab $20 out of the till, you might grab $20 out of the till, right? That still happens today. And it was no different back then. But the difference was they didn't have cameras. Today we have cameras as a deterrent. They didn't have that back then. And so this very building has 4 secret rooms and 2 secret corridors to get into those rooms. There's 2 upstairs and two downstairs. And one of them is above the vault. The vault here is quite big. The vault's probably 10 feet by 10 feet or so. And then above that, there's a room that's actually bigger than that. But we actually took one of it's called the inspector's mezzanine is what it was called. We converted it into a bedroom and actually we allow people to stay up in it actually. So we only allow them to stay when we're actually here, and we're only here on the weekends. The museum's only open Saturday and Sunday, but we've had, I don't know, dozen people that have stayed up in that room actually. And the only way to get to it is up a ladder behind a secret door. And so once you're there, if you have to pee in the middle of the night, you gotta walk down a ladder. By the way, the ladder itself is pretty cool too. The ladder was built by a blacksmith shop that used to be across the street. So it's a fixed ladder that you have to go up, but it's kind of cool.
So being that it's a ghost town,
yeah.
Do you have any ghosts?
So everybody asks us that, and in fact, before we owned the building, the previous owner would let paranormal investigations go on in this building, and there was a couple different paranormal investigators that would come from Salt Lake, and they charge people to come up, and they would do these, very late night, 2 a.m, look for ghost kind of things, and they regularly came in this building. And then when we bought the building, the same guy came in and asked if he could come in and do it, and I actually said no. The biggest reason is because we actually live in the building on the weekends. We have 3 bedrooms total in this building, and so we live in the building. And I'm not really into the ghost thing myself. Candace is, but I'm not really into it. But I'm just naive enough that if you tell me that something happened and you plant that seed, even if I don't believe it, it'll wake me up in the middle of the night. Every little weird sound is gonna, what I mean? It's gonna wake me up. And by the way, it's it's a 100-year-old building, so it makes a lot of noises at nighttime.
Well, the other thing is you've got hidden passages with people all over the building. I mean, that's going to make you paranoid as hell right there.
That's what I tell people though, that I don't want to, say ghosts don't exist. I mean, if they exist, they do. But I said, if that part is really true, if we die and we're able to occupy someplace, I don't think it would be the post office. I don't think that's a place I'd hang out in,
It might be the coolest place around there. You know what I mean? There's not a lot going on,
No, there's not a lot going on. No.
It's a quiet place for the devil.
Yeah.
Right. Well, look, I'm really glad you guys came on, and I really like what you're doing there. I think it's a great thing what you're doing for the community and for the biking people, man. People come riding through there. You got a cool place for them to stop on the weekends. You hand out refreshments for free, let them tour and look at all the bikes and all the cool history. it's just a great thing. It was a good choice where you went,
Yeah, it's turned into this thing that was going to be like on a retirement, make a little extra money thing to that. My retirement plans completely changed, by the way. It has nothing to do with the museum anymore, but it really has turned into me specifically, and somewhat Candace, because she hasn't been in Utah that long, but it really is me giving back to my community. Now, I'm not from Eureka, but I spent enough time in Utah, and Utah has been good to me, and raised my family here. It's been a wonderful place to raise family, and I'm like, this is a good way for me to give back and have a little fun. So we truly are here now just to get people to come to the town. There's a half a dozen other businesses in town. We have 2 restaurants and some rock shops. If you know what a rock shop is, rocks are a whole nother passion for people. And there's some other oddity gift type places that are here as well. And they're here partly because, well, some of them for sure here because we're here, and
for sure.
because we can bring some people, but we don't. We want to bring the people for them. We want to pay for the lights and for the taxes, but ourselves, we don't make any money. But I also don't want to spend money, I guess you would say. So this is one way to where I can have a place to store the motorcycles and have people see them, and have an enjoyable event, every single weekend. So every single weekend we do live music every Saturday, and the coffee is being made. Candace is the barista in here, and we just try and make it a fun, pit stop for people that are on, to the next destination. Almost every weekend we're a poker run stop, at some point.
And how's the writing? Is the writing good around that area?
The writing's amazing around here. Yeah, and it's interesting. Before we bought the building, we would come up and we would just count motorcycles. I knew I would ride through here, and I love seeing the old buildings. But by the way, they were all boarded up at that time. But you still love seeing that old history, and kind of like out in your part of the wood, you got like Calico. It would have been something along that lines, and we would just sit and count motorcycles, and we estimated before we were even here that there was 300-400 motorcycles a day that were coming through here on the weekend, and I'm like, well, that's significant, and now that number is far greater than that, because we're on, when the weather's good, meaning that between, let's say, 65 degrees and 85-degree temperatures, we'll see 300 to 400 visitors inside the building on a weekend. So I mean, we some of our rides that come through here, they're 800 motorcycles in one shot, and so we can get a big crowd here, and not all of them stay very long. There may be just a poker run where they're only here for 30 minutes, but some of them come back because they thought, hey, this is a neat place, and we want them to come back, and we want them to buy lunch at the restaurant, one of our 2 restaurants. So,
all right, I got an idea for you. So what you do is you get a couple bedrooms up there, like a bed and breakfast kind of a thing, for the Haunted Silver Mine Museum, right?
Yeah.
And then these
By
people.
the way, that has crossed my mind. But,
and then people are sleeping up there. They got all this weird stuff going on down the hidden hallways, the people, all that stuff. You know what I mean?
So we actually have some people coming here in October to spend the night. It's ironically, it's their anniversary. They got married on Halloween. They're really into the occult type of things, and they're staying in the museum on Halloween night because for that very reason.
Yeah.
So,
all right, you guys. Well, look, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. You got anything else you want to add before we get off here?
Well, I just would add that, if you're, riding in Utah, you mentioned the rides around here, we have literally thousands of miles of beautiful roads to ride around northern Utah and southern Utah. But right here where the museum is, there's easily 400 or 500 miles of road to come through here. So, if you're out in Utah, take the time to take the little journey to Eureka. The road to get here is beautiful. There's some switchbacks to get up to 6,500 feet, and you come into this old, mining town. And we also have a mining museum in town, and I would encourage people to go in the mining museum and learn about the history of the town as well. So the town itself, this building in particular, I don't know if I mentioned, but this building that we're in is on the National Historic Register. So when people do come in and I'm able to give them a tour of the building, it's really to talk about the building and the importance of what a post office was, to the community in 1902. But then also the history of motorcycles, and you and I talked about this, but I'll share this with you. The motorcycles that we have, these aren't, pre-1920 motorcycles. I do have some early motorcycles, and most of them are Harleys and Indians that are in here, but most of what I have are iconic motorcycles, and motorcycles that, people are going to recognize and have an attachment to. Either they had one when they were young, or their dad had one, or grandpa had one. I don't have the collection that, everyone that ever, laid eyes on that bike when it was operation is dead now. I don't have bike like that. We actually have another museum in Utah that does have that. And so I kind of serve the people that, that are still alive, that remember a lot of the bikes. And, I have some bikes in here that are valuable, and I have some bikes that are not valuable at all, but people take photographs of them and they get emotional when they see them, because it is the bike that they rode, or learned to ride a motorcycle on, or it was their first Harley Davidson, or whatever the story is.
Yeah.
So we get more, like, we don't necessarily cater to the families. We certainly get families in here and they have a great experience, but we really cater to the motorcycle community as they're coming through. So most of what we see, I'd say 80%, 90% of what comes in here is going to be motorcyclists that come in here.
Yeah,
Right on.
sure.
Yeah, I'd be stopping.
Yeah, I would encourage people to, take the journey to Eureka. And we do a big celebration. As I mentioned, it happens in August of every year. And we do a big car show, a motorcycle show, an antique motorcycle show. And like I said, we have live music every week. And so it's a neat place just to kind of come and hang out. And it's a cheap day because we don't charge for anything. So.
Right on, man. Well, thank you very much.
Coffee from Candace.
Right on. Thank you very much for coming on. And
Thanks for having us.
good luck with it.
For having us.
Keep on doing what you're doing. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to you
Thanks
guys.
for taking the time.